Why is it that some people spend their entire lives working exhaustingly hard, playing by all the rules, and yet never achieve true financial freedom, while others build extraordinary wealth from seemingly ordinary beginnings? Let us be brutally honest for a moment. You spent the first 2 decades of your life inside a building called a school. You sat in chairs, you memorized facts, you took standardized tests, and you earned a piece of paper that, historically speaking, has produced almost zero self-made millionaires. This is not an attack on the education system or the professionals within it. Teachers, textbooks, and university advisors serve a highly specific and necessary purpose: to produce competent, reliable workers for an economy that desperately needs millions of them. But they were never designed to produce wealthy people. If they had been, the administrators and academics running those very institutions would be incredibly wealthy themselves. Most are not. By design, the traditional education system treats human potential as the raw material on a highly efficient industrial conveyor belt. There are, in reality, 2 distinct curricula operating in this world. The first is the public curriculum. It is printed in standard textbooks and tested in massive exam halls. It covers reading, writing, history, and arithmetic. It is highly useful in its own way, but it remains absolutely silent on the precise mechanics of how human beings actually accumulate and sustain wealth. Then, there is the second curriculum. We can call it the unwritten curriculum. It is graded nowhere, and you will not find it in any standard syllabus. Instead, it is passed down quietly, generation by generation, in back offices, private living rooms, and between mentors and the rare apprentice who knew enough to ask the right questions. While 99% of people are busy perfecting their resumes to compete for a minor promotion, the top 1% are busy perfecting their financial structures and quietly buying the very buildings those promotions happen inside. While the majority argue about tax brackets, the wealthy are engineering their lives and businesses so that heavy taxation becomes someone else's problem. Understanding this matters deeply because true success is rarely about merely securing a higher salary. It is about fundamentally changing your relationship with value creation, time, and money. Success is often less like winning a lottery and more like planting a tree that grows slowly over decades. It requires a foundational shift in mindset. If you want to build long-term success, you have to stop operating on the default settings provided by society. To understand how this actually works, we have to look at the hidden mechanisms of capitalism. The foundational mechanism of all wealth building comes down to a single, uncompromising concept: ownership. The public curriculum trains you to be an exemplary employee. You are taught to get a secure job, exchange your waking hours for a steady paycheck, and carefully climb the corporate ladder until retirement. The unwritten curriculum teaches one fundamental word: own. In every economy that has ever existed, wealth inevitably flows from those who use assets to those who own assets. The renter pays the owner, the borrower pays the lender, and the employee enriches the employer. This is not a moral judgment. It is simply the mechanical architecture of the global economy. An investor once explained it this way: when you pay rent, you are essentially paying someone else's salary for the month. You might work 40 hours a week to write that check, while the owner works perhaps 8 hours a year to receive and process it. A person saving capital in a traditional bank account will see marginal growth over a 40-year period due to low interest and inflation. But a person who places that exact same capital into an income-producing asset, whether it is a piece of real estate, equity in a business, or an index fund, activates a compounding engine. You are either accumulating ownership or you are paying someone else who is. There is no third option. True wealth begins the exact moment you stop renting your life and start owning fragments of the world. But ownership alone is only half of the equation. The next mechanism is determining how much force you can apply to the things you own. This brings us to leverage. 2,500 years ago, Archimedes noted that with a lever long enough, he could move the world. He was talking about physics, but the unwritten curriculum applies this exact principle to capital. The public curriculum is terrified of leverage. Conventional financial advice points entirely toward playing it safe. Avoid debt at all costs. Pay only in cash, and aim for a quiet financial horizon where your mortgage is paid off just in time for your 60s. But the unwritten curriculum treats leverage not as an inherent danger, but as a neutral, incredibly powerful tool when wielded by someone with discipline and knowledge. There are 3 primary forms of leverage. The first is capital leverage, which involves using borrowed money to acquire appreciating assets. The second is labor leverage, where you hire and delegate, multiplying your output well beyond your own two hands. But the third, and perhaps the most important in the modern era, is zero marginal cost leverage. This is code that runs without you. It is a piece of software written once and used by millions. It is media recorded once and distributed globally while you sleep. The traditional worker sells 1 hour of time for 1 unit of pay. The wealth builder engineers systems that sell continuously. You were handed a shovel in school and told to dig. True wealth is built by learning to operate the heavy machinery. As we decode these mechanisms, it is vital to expose the common misunderstandings that keep intelligent, hardworking people trapped in the cycle of the public curriculum. Many people believe that successful entrepreneurs take massive, reckless risks to get ahead. In reality, the most successful investors and business builders focus heavily on minimizing and managing downside risk before they ever make a move. They do not gamble, they calculate. Another major misconception is that wealth is simply a byproduct of a high salary. People often assume that high-earning professionals are automatically wealthy, but a high income without ownership merely creates a highly paid employee who is still strictly tethered to the clock. High income does not equal wealth if every dollar earned is immediately consumed by lifestyle inflation. The reality is that true wealth is mostly invisible. It is the portfolio of assets working quietly in the background, not the luxury items purchased to project an illusion of success. Here's where things get interesting. Because to truly grasp how high performers build durable wealth, we have to examine what they actively monitor on a daily basis. The rhythm of the modern world demands immediate satisfaction. The working professional is trained by the public curriculum to think strictly in terms of 2-week paychecks. When your income cycle is short and vulnerable, your planning horizon naturally contracts to match that volatility. But the wealthy have re-engineered their perspective. They actively watch entirely different metrics. While the majority of people are monitoring immediate market trends, the latest consumer goods or office politics, highly successful individuals are strictly monitoring their long-term habits, their cash flow structures, their time allocation, and their personal performance across decades. A successful entrepreneur once described this principle as the ultimate hidden advantage in business. They noted that the longer the game you are willing to play, the smaller the field of competitors becomes. By the time you are operating on a 30-year horizon, the playing field is practically empty. This introduces a critical concept known as hyperbolic discounting, a well-documented psychological tendency to massively overvalue an immediate reward while undervaluing a delayed one. High performers meticulously monitor their own impulses. They recognize that taking a small immediate gain almost always sacrifices a massive future return. They train their nervous systems to feel the reality of the future, allowing them to make decisions today that will pay dividends 20 years from now. But to understand what really separates successful people from everyone else, we have to look at the warning signs that indicate a person is heading toward a financial dead end. One of the most glaring red flags is lifestyle inflation, driven by what is known as the outer scorecard. Almost every visible expense in the modern middle-class lifestyle is, at its root, a small payment made toward the opinion of strangers. This is conspicuous consumption, the act of buying things primarily to communicate status to people who, frankly, do not care. When individuals make financial decisions based on what their neighbors, co-workers, and relatives think, they enter a highly dangerous cycle. The warning signs are clear: an obsession with brand names, taking on high-interest consumer debt for depreciating assets, and emotional decision-making driven by a fear of missing out. The psychological trap here is the hedonic treadmill. Whatever luxury you purchase to impress others becomes entirely invisible to you within a few months. You return to your baseline level of satisfaction, and suddenly you require the next major purchase just to maintain that same fleeting feeling of approval. The cycle is endless, the financial bill is enormous, and the actual respect you are chasing materializes. So let's look deeper into the strategic interactions between your mindset, your money, and your environment. High performers substitute the outer scorecard for an inner compass. They optimize for what they know to be true behind closed doors. They understand that performing wealth and actually building wealth are nearly opposite activities. Building is quiet, slow, and requires immense discipline. Performing is expensive, exhausting, and produces nothing durable. A crucial warning sign is when an individual feels the intense need to continuously display their success. It almost always masks a highly fragile financial foundation. And this is where most people completely miss the point about how success is actually constructed. They believe that if they simply put their head down and work hard in isolation, the results will naturally follow. But effort does not exist in a vacuum. Your environment interacts with your habits and your mindset in a profound, unavoidable way. There is a deeply observable truth in wealth building. Who you sit next to often matters significantly more than how hard you work. Sociologists refer to this as peer convergence. Over time, human beings naturally converge financially, behaviorally, and aspirationally with the 5 people they spend the most voluntary time with. It does not happen by conscious intention. It happens through constant, subtle exposure. If your closest circle is operating strictly on the public curriculum, complaining about taxes, chasing minor promotions, and spending their weekends purely consuming entertainment, your spending patterns, your career ambitions, and your baseline sense of what is normal will inevitably drift toward theirs. Conversely, if you deliberately place yourself in an environment with business owners, investors, and disciplined high performers, your entire trajectory shifts. You begin to observe how they interact with risk. You see how they manage their time. You hear the specific questions they ask and note the books they recommend. Their reality slowly and silently becomes your reality. This strategic interaction between your network and your skill set is perhaps the most powerful force multiplier in personal development. Wealth, discipline, and ambition are highly contagious. Unfortunately, complacency and poor financial habits are exactly as contagious. Let us analyze the possible outcomes based on how you choose to navigate these principles. If you choose to ignore the inner compass and dismiss the power of your network, the most likely outcome is continuous labor without leverage. You will remain trapped in the paycheck cycle, highly vulnerable to economic shifts, and perpetually exhausted by the performance of status. If you apply these principles only partially, perhaps you invest a little capital, but you still surround yourself with a stagnant network and make purchases based on the outer scorecard, you will experience severe internal friction. You might generate some wealth, but lifestyle inflation will aggressively consume your profits before they can truly compound. You will constantly feel like you are taking 1 step forward and 2 steps back. But what happens if you apply these concepts consistently? If you master your inner scorecard, actively curate your network, and extend your decision-making timeline to decades rather than days, the outcome is a compounding machine. You remove yourself from the frantic, overcrowded competition of the present moment. You begin to build structural, resilient wealth that operates completely independently of your daily labor. And this is where the real lesson begins. Because all the leverage, all the ownership, and all the long-term planning in the world will eventually stagnate without the final binding law of wealth: continuous, relentless self-education. The public curriculum officially ends after 18, 22, or perhaps 26 years. You walk across a stage, receive a diploma, and enter what society quietly calls the real world. From that exact moment forward, almost no one will ever ask you to learn anything substantial again. This is the ultimate trap. The highly successful never stop the curriculum. They simply replace the imposed curriculum of formal schooling with the self-imposed curriculum of adulthood. They become the administrators of their own continuous education. There is a phrase practically universally understood by high performers: "I am still learning." This is never said as a humble statement to impress others. It is a cold, operational fact. They absorb books on history, psychology, negotiation, finance, and human behavior. They recognize that the gap between where they currently are and where they want to be is almost entirely a gap in knowledge. One business leader compared this to a software update. If you stop updating your operating system, you eventually become entirely obsolete in a rapidly advancing market. When observing these high-level strategies, several common questions naturally arise. People often ask, can anyone actually become financially successful? The reality is that while starting lines and initial resources are drastically different for everyone, the underlying mechanics of ownership, leverage, and compounding apply universally. Another common question is, how long does real success usually take? The unwritten curriculum operates in decades. True wealth is a slow architectural project, not an overnight sprint. It takes years of quiet, unglamorous consistency. Many also wonder, is hard work alone enough? The brutal truth is no. Hard work applied to the wrong vehicle, like aggressively digging with a small shovel when you should be learning to operate heavy machinery, guarantees exhaustion, not wealth. So why do so many highly intelligent, hardworking people fail financially? Most often, it is because they fall victim to the outer scorecard, allowing lifestyle inflation and the desperate need for social approval to drain their resources, or they simply abandon self-education the moment they leave school. If you want to break free from these traps, you need a highly practical framework to execute immediately. Consider this your personal success checklist. First, commit to crossing the line from renter to owner within the next 6 months. Purchase your first fragment of ownership, whether it is a fractional share of a business, a modest index fund, or a piece of equity in something that produces value. The initial financial size is irrelevant. Crossing the psychological line from consumer to owner is the only shift that matters. Second, audit and upgrade your hidden network. Spend at least 1 hour this month intentionally listening to someone whose financial trajectory you want to learn from. Buy them coffee, ask precise questions, and listen intensely. Third, implement a strict daily protocol for self-education. Read 20 pages of highly substantive, challenging material every single evening. Not social media, not fleeting news headlines, but deep, durable knowledge. Over a single year, that translates to completing roughly 20 serious books. Across decades, the accumulated knowledge deeply absorbed from those pages is sufficient to entirely rewrite your financial trajectory. As you implement these steps, it is vital to remember that success is a highly individualized journey. The results you seek will take time, and everyone's financial situation, risk tolerance, and starting capital vary deeply. Building wealth is never about taking reckless leaps, looking for guarantees, or chasing empty get-rich-quick schemes. It is about making informed, educated, and heavily calculated decisions over a very long time horizon. Continuous learning is your greatest defense against a volatile world. Out of everyone examining these principles today, a vast majority will simply agree, feel briefly inspired for an afternoon, and then return entirely to the exact patterns of the life they were already living. But a select few will fundamentally change their trajectory starting tonight. The traditional school is closed, but the unwritten curriculum is wide open. You are the teacher now. You are also the student. If you found this breakdown valuable, do not forget to subscribe to the Debriefing Room for more deep insights into wealth, success, business, and personal growth. Hit the like button and let me know in the comments. What is the first fragment of ownership you plan to acquire? And what is the next book you are going to read?